On the 26th of April 1986, one of the greatest technological catastrophes took place close to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. That was an explosion in the fourth reactor of the Chornobyl nuclear power plant. And that was a tragedy for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the world. But I think that history is always very personal, and the more association and memories you have about a particular event, the more real it is. I was born in that period, and I was greatly influenced by the events that followed Chernobyl catastrophe. Let me give you a couple of examples from my own childhood. When I went to school and I was in the first or in the second form, I have a memory. Like when you return back to a classroom on a break and you find a peel of iodine on your desk, once a month. And it was totally okay for us to return back and to find that peel, to take it. I cannot imagine a modern child returning back to a classroom that was empty, finding a peel without any inscription on it and eating it actually. But for us it was okay, it was a way to prevent radioactive influence and to protect our thyroids. A second memory that I have is when me and Dad went to a local market to buy some berries or mushrooms from the forest. Some of the forests in my regions became radioactive, and it was important not to buy products from that zone. And it was quite tricky because radiation made look berries and mushrooms bigger and better, and you had to be careful. We all lived with radiation on our mind. It was a part of our normality, once again because of Soviet decisions that were wrong. Today we live with war that is almost a part of our normality, once again because of Russia. Evil always comes to us from that part of the world, and we have to stop this bad tradition.
Чернобыльская атомная электростанция. Первый энергоблок запущен в 1977 году.
The Chernobyl catastrophe was a greatest nuclear accident in the history of mankind. It happened on the 26th of April 1986. In Pripyat, really close to the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. An explosion led to a serious fire and emission of radioactive components into the atmosphere, water, and soil. Approximately 500,000 personnel were involved in emergency response and further decontamination of environment. And it all cost close to $89 billion, according to the 2019 rates and inflation. The accident that happened on Chernobyl nuclear power plant actually began during a safety test. It was an ordinary safety test, but because of some mistakes of the workers multiplied by the flaw of the construction of the plant, it resulted into a serious tragedy. Because of a serious power dropout, the reactor shut down, and steam explosions led to the destruction, actually melting, of the reactor's core. The meltdown and explosions destroyed the reactor building. What is worse, an open radioactive fire continued until the 4th of May, emitting hundreds and thousands of poisonous elements into the atmosphere of Chernobyl, Pripyat, and adjacent cities, actually influencing all Ukraine, all Belarus, and all Europe. Soviets tried to hide this information. That's why the rescue operation started 36 hours later than it should, on the 28th of April. Lots of people were evacuated. The first portion included close to 50,000 people, and in a couple of days the zone of exclusion was enlarged from 10 kilometers to 30 kilometers, and 69,000 more people left their homes. They were promised they are leaving the territory for a couple of days, so they did not take anything serious with them. But they never returned back.
В ночь на 26 апреля то, что было нашей гордостью, стало адресом нашей беды.
At first, even workers of Chernobyl plant did not believe a catastrophe of that size was possible and denied actually the things that happened and were happening in the reality. At the very start of the explosion, 2 engineers died and 2 more were severely burned. Then, within a few days of rescue operation, many people received radioactive poisoning and 150 of them died because of acute radiation syndrome in hospitals. Of course, hundreds and thousands were influenced forever and lost their health. Perhaps you are thinking that Soviet government was busy organizing emergency rescue operation, but you are totally wrong. Soviets were working on the organization of emergency cover-up operation, trying to hide from USSR citizens and the world the size of the catastrophe that happened on Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And they succeeded, but not for a long period of time. On the 28th of April, classical music appeared on all radio stations of the Soviet Union. And that was a very typical sign that the audience is getting prepared for some tragic announcement. Why did they agree to inform Soviet society and the world about this catastrophe? Well, because it's impossible to hide the greatest nuclear explosion in the history of the world. And because of Swedish specialists that on the power plant in Forsmark measured the radioactive levels and were surprised, negatively surprised, with high level of radiations. They have informed the Swedish agency, which really quickly answered that radiation comes from a different place, not from the Forsmark power plant. Very soon, Swedish authorities addressed Soviet authorities with a question: is anything bad happening on nuclear power stations in the USSR? The first answer was no, but pressed with responsibility of Swedish agency who wanted to contact International Atomic Energy Agency, they had to confess that a minor accident happened on Chernobyl power station.
Все вы знаете, недавно нас постигла беда. Авария на Чернобыльской атомной электростанции.
So it is obvious, no matter how professional you are in censorship and propaganda, you cannot hide the greatest accident in the history of mankind. That's why Soviets had to speak about it and chose a traditional tactics of whataboutism. On the news, first they introduced the public to various nuclear accidents, talking a lot about 3 Mile Island accident in the United States, and only then proceeding to a minor accident on Chernobyl power plant. It was first mentioned on the 28th of April, 2 days later after the catastrophe happening and when already many people were dead or influenced by radiation. So only at 9 p.m. on a top news show Время, a couple of second message was mentioned. And now I am even going to quote the translation of these couple of sentences that describe the greatest tragedy in the modern history of mankind. So what did the TV host said? He said, "There has been an accident at the Chornobyl nuclear power plant. One of the nuclear reactors was damaged. The effects of the accident are being remedied. Assistance has been provided for any affected people. An investigative commission has been set up." But Soviet people, I mean, knew really well how information works in the USSR. So the very fact of commission created to study this accident meant that something huge happened in Chernobyl 2 days before. You may say, this is not a crime, this is a problem, a malfunction, or actually a set of wrong steps that were taken. But I still insist this is one of Soviet and Russian crimes. Why? Because of the way people acted, responsible people acted after this explosion happened. Well, first of all, they were hiding the information for many days, and they did not reveal it fully until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Secondly, they did not care much about people involved in emergency rescue operations. Many of them went on the site totally unprepared, and they did not know with what they are actually dealing. They saw huge hot pieces of graphite and were playing football with them. They did not realize that this is the heart of radiation. What is worse, many of inhabitants of Pripyat were observing a beautiful radioactive fire for hours, showing it to their children and not realizing that they receive daily doses of radiation while watching this unusual phenomenon. Perhaps the most tragic fate was of the workers who stayed on the Chernobyl power plant and helped stopping the fire, and of course the firefighters. Their stories were fixed and now are basis for various documentaries, films, plays, and even video games. What is also important, they have described everything, how this radiation feels. A certain metal taste in your mouth, pins and needles on your skin, and seems like nothing major is happening. But then, in a couple of days, a person is dead.
Мы впервые реально столкнулись с такой грозной силой, какой является ядерная энергия, вышедшая из-под контроля.
And now perhaps you think, what were Soviets doing at this moment when the radioactive fire was still burning and people were already dying in hospitals? They were thinking about the organization of the parade for the International Labor Day in Kyiv. Kyiv is really close to Pripyat and Chernobyl. Kyiv was covered with radioactive clouds. It was hugely poisoned. But they were thinking about the picture that will appear on the TV screens and the world will see it, not caring about people. Children were walking in the streets, people were enjoying spring, and the decision was made that the parade will be shorter, will take place not 4 hours, but 2 hours. So people were made to walk the streets of Kyiv that was full of radioactive particles to make the picture of the beautiful Soviet life. And this is a crime. Same as the crime not to inform people living close to Chernobyl for 2 days how dangerous their environment has become. A crime is not to think about firefighters or workers who do their best to stop this tragedy. A crime is not to inform the world about the dangers created inside the nuclear power station in Soviet Union and not to take responsibility for the actions that led to that. Explosion on Chernobyl power station was a tragedy. But the problem is that it is a tragedy of years or centuries. It did not stop when the fire stopped, because the huge territory around the nuclear power station was totally radioactive. Animals died, people were evacuated, and a huge alienation zone was created. Very soon, Chernobyl reactor was covered with sarcophagus in 1986. And in 2017, it was renewed and a totally new construction was put above the sarcophagus to protect the environment from further emissions. Different analyses exist as to when Chernobyl zone can return back to normal life. According to the most optimistic estimates, in 320 years, and according to the worst, more than 10,000 years.
Учитывая чрезвычайный и опасный характер того, что произошло в Чернобыле, Политбюро взяло в свои руки всю организацию работы по быстрейшей ликвидации аварии, ограничению ее последствий.
According to a World Health Organization estimates, more than 9,000 cases of cancer will be closely connected with Chernobyl explosion. especially those of thyroid and lungs. Many other mutations and diseases will become normal for this territory once again because of radiation. Straight after the explosions, hundreds of cattle died, unable to be evacuated, and plants and forests became extremely radioactive. We know the term red forest. This is a very big zone of forest around Chernobyl that turned red and died straight after the explosion on the power station. Last year, during short period of Russian occupation of these territories, Russian soldiers were stupid enough to build trenches in this radioactive forest, once again demonstrating indifference and, I'm sorry, stupidity of Russian people responsible for this crime.
Огромную долю работы и ответственности взяли на свои плечи партийные, советские и хозяйственные органы Украины и Белоруссии.
Many people who lived in the zone of Chernobyl were evacuated to different regions. They were promised they will return in a couple of days or weeks, but they never returned and their houses stayed empty forever. But at the same time, when we focus on this negative environmental influence and direct victims of the explosions, we forget about thousands of people who lost their homes forever. Some of them decided to return to the zone of alienation that is now 2,600 square kilometers. They are known as samoseli, and they continue living in radioactive zones, believing that radiation gives them less harm than homesickness and nostalgia. They live from excursions, they live from various people who come and visit them. And in 2011, the zone was open for tourists, of course with guides, who can demonstrate you the atmosphere of the abandoned Pripyat. And it is very depressing. We wanted to take you on that excursion, but now it is impossible, because we have war in Ukraine and such objects must be protected. I hope one day, really soon, we will win and we will be able to show you more of Chernobyl. Let us know what are the specific things you would like to see there.
На сегодня 299 человек госпитализированы с диагнозом лучевой болезни разной степени тяжести. 7 из них скончались.
Today there are a lot of interesting products, if it's possible to say so, that speak about the catastrophe in Chernobyl. For example, a fantastic HBO series Chernobyl that I greatly advise you to watch. It is extremely accurate and it depicts the atmosphere of the dying Soviet Union perfectly. Also a book, Voices from Chernobyl, by Svetlana Alexievich, who is a Nobel Prize winner and an author from Belarus. And there are even video games like Stalker that let you walk the streets of Pripyat. Anyway, this is a story that became known, and to some extent, I believe, Chernobyl catastrophe and totally unprofessional reaction of the Soviet government was one of the reasons for the further collapse of the monstrous empire.
От имени ЦК КПСС и советского правительства выражаю глубокое сочувствие семьям, родственникам погибших, трудовым коллективам, всем, кто пострадал от этой беды, кого постигло личное горе.
My name is Anna, and I am from Ukraine. And even more, in Ukraine, my generation is known as Chernobyl generation. And we even liked it, because we had some benefits from the state, like free summer camps or more food at school. But I think it's a tragedy. And the more I think, the more I realize that all of our problems come from Russia, come from Moscow. It is so bad that before this war, one of the first associations that world had with Ukraine was Chornobyl. Today, it is war. And in both of these associations, the fault is not ours. The fault, the evil, the darkness comes from Moscow. And they have to be stopped. And to stop them, we have to know more about the enemy. So do subscribe to my channel to learn more about Russian war in Ukraine, Russian crimes, and Soviet myths that still fuel Russian military machine.